我觉得就川普现在的立场吧，可能中国就会比较不敢乱动之类的吗？
I think it's very interesting to me that in Taiwan still so generally believe that Trump is anti-China, and I think the worry I have with Trump is he may be very anti-China one day as a posture, as a negotiating tactic, right? But then the next day turn around and say, well, we don't want to defend Taiwan, or Taiwan never pays their dues, or doesn't raise their GDP to 10%. It's not worth us defending. China can have it.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. 2024 has been a year of elections. Around half of the world population has either chosen their political representatives or will do so by the end of the year. But perhaps the most consequential of these votes will happen on November 5th in the United States. The choice Americans make on that day will shape not only the future of their country, but also impact many other places in the world. And Taiwan, regularly threatened by China, may be affected more than most. To help us understand the significance of the U.S. presidential election for Taiwan, we welcome Chieh-Ting, the director of the think tank U.S Taiwan Watch and the co-founder of Catalan Media, joining us from Mountain View, California. And here in Taipei, we have our very own Jaime Ocon, TaiwanPlus's lead defense correspondent, who's recently back from the United States, where he was looking into how the U.S. elections will affect Taiwan's security. Thank you both so much for being part of the program. I'm going to start with you, Chieh-Ting. As we said in the introduction, Taiwan could be hugely affected by the U.S. presidential elections. Could it?
I think that's definitely a concern that everybody has. I think the new president and the new administration and new national security and foreign policy teams will definitely bring a different flavor to the current U.S.-Taiwan relations, whether it be the Harris team or the Trump team. Although I think if you look at the bigger picture, U.S.-Taiwan relations have sort of been a bipartisan issue in Washington, D.C. And I think support for Taiwan in general is going to at least sort of be the norm at least in the short term. And I think the way that kind of manifests may be slightly different from administration to administration or from party to party, but I think it is a pretty bipartisan issue at the moment.
Absolutely. And throughout the program, I want to break it down into the different moving parts of the relationship with the U.S. But before I go to that, Jaime, you were in the U.S. recently. How much talk was there really, if you look at the media or, just the average discourse we're seeing mainstream about Taiwan, really?
I mean, nothing too much from the candidates' side in terms of Taiwan directly, like in a natural way. Some media organizations have asked about Taiwan in their exclusive interviews. Kamala being very consistent with Kamala Harris being very consistent with her standing on, the one China policy, and that we need to do everything we can to help defend Taiwan. And then Trump, as well, talking about, having closer ties with Putin and trying to kind of dodge the question. So nothing on their own, but there has been a lot of watch, I think, recently from speaking to analysts in DC about kind of the threat that is posed to Taiwan, just seeing it kind of progress more in the sense of seeing China's large-scale exercises after Chieh-Ting was inaugurated, and especially after National Day. So there's a lot of talk about kind of security in Asia and seeing how both sides are going to tackle that, and whoever wins is how they're going to tackle the Indo-Pacific region.
Absolutely, Jaime, and I'm glad you brought all of those things up, because that's a sneak peek into the rest of this program. But before we carry on, we want to take a look at what's happening on the streets here in Taiwan. So take a listen to this. Helping Taiwan defend itself against potential Chinese aggression is a largely bipartisan issue, as Chieh-Ting said, in U.S. politics. But even small differences in approach may have lasting consequences for the balance of power in the Taiwan Strait and the rest of Asia, as Jaime said. So we asked people on the streets of Taipei how much they knew about the two major candidates for U.S. president. And this is what we found out.
我只知道有一个川普跟另外一个叫贺什么的外国人。
我记得川普应该是对中强硬派是吗？贺锦丽好像比较可能稍微柔和一点之类的。
我对川普比较有印象。假如觉得是川普上来的话，在这方面我们台湾的感受到的军事准备的那个压力和张力，应该会比现在会再强烈一点。因为他本身也是比较 奔放、比较刺激型的总统。那另外一个民主党候选人，因为平常就比较没有特别 follow，所以对他的印象很模糊。
我觉得就川普现在的立场吧，可能中国就会比较不敢乱动之类的嘛。但对台湾的影响可能比较直接的就，可能中国比较不会有太大的动作。
我觉得川普这个人很难真的信任他，然后不太知道说他真正相信的价值是什么。
我觉得贺锦丽当选呢，当然就是他会持续的维持就是现有的拜登的政策，当然是为持续的维持世界的和平。那我觉得可能会有比较大对东亚的变动，当然就是川普的当选，他其实就是很典型的一个美国主义至上的一个总统候选人，所以他所有的一切考量，当然就会以美国本身为主。对于台湾本身来讲的话呢，我觉得它跟中国的竞争性就会更明显一点。那这样子的一个，我们在于这样子一个中间之下，台湾势必一定会受到一些影响。
Trump's stance will deter or stave off China. Harris administration would be better for world peace. That's some of the comments there. Anything there jump out at you, Chieh-Ting?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to me that people in Taiwan still so generally believe that Trump is, anti-China. I think sort of from where I kind of sit, I think he has sort of swung or kind of said things that are very, very pro-China and said things that are very anti-China. He I think just recently said, I don't want to say he's a friend, but me and Chieh-Ting are pretty tight, right? And he's invited him to Mar-a-Lago and had his grandkids dance for him. So I think the way Trump kind of sees things is, if it doesn't go his way, he reacts violently, right? But I think people in China and the leadership in China certainly knows this, and I think the worry I have with Trump is he may be very anti-China one day as a posture, as a negotiating tactic, right? But then the next day turn around and say, well, we don't want to defend Taiwan, or Taiwan never pays their dues or doesn't raise their GDP to 10%. It's not worth us defending. Okay, China can have it, right? So I think to me, Trump is, no matter how you look at it, I think it's just at the very least very volatile. So.
Jaime, we've heard the view from the street there. You regularly speak to those who drive policy both in Taiwan and recently in Washington. What would you say is the view from the top there? Who is preferable for Taiwan?
Well, just to piggyback off what Chieh-Ting said, it's that I think when we were doing our Harris stories and our Trump stories, there was two words that can describe each one. But with Kamala Harris, it was a lot of consistency. That word was used a lot in the sense of we don't quite know exactly what her individual policy is going to be towards Taiwan, but it'll probably be something like Biden. We need to see who Kamala picks, to drive policy in Asia. But with Trump, off what Chieh-Ting said, there was a lot of unpredictability. That word was really thrown around in the sense of Trump can be maybe a little more reactionary. To answer your question in terms of who's better, it depends. Kamala Harris has been very vocal in terms of engaging with Southeast Asian countries. We've seen her tour Singapore, Japan, Philippines, very close relations with the Philippines. But then when you look at arms sales, under Trump, Taiwan spent the most ever on foreign military sales under the Trump administration. So it really depends on kind of what you want in terms of maybe like what Chieh-Ting said about more robust economic ties or maybe more closer defense ties.
All right. So speaking of Harris, the Democratic candidate has not said much on the topic of Taiwan during her campaign. And when asked about it directly, Kamala Harris gave a rather familiar sounding answer. Take a listen.
Listen, we need to make sure that we maintain a one China policy. But that includes supporting Taiwan's ability to defend itself.
Well, let me restate the point I've made many times. I believe in the one China policy, and I believe that Taiwan has the right to defend itself.
All right, Chieh-Ting, what does that say to you about Harris's stance when it comes to Taiwan? Is it just a continuation of the current administration?
I think just kind of looking at the way she answered those questions, it tells me that she's kind of learning on the fly, right? She's kind of learning about the China issue, the Taiwan issue, what she should say, what she shouldn't say, what people think could be said and what people think couldn't be said, and how she should say it and what the magic words are. And I think she's kind of learning all of those things on the campaign trail as we go along, right? Because she wasn't prepared to run to become president until a few months ago. So I think right now, my guess is that her attitude towards kind of foreign policy and all of these, very kind of long-standing issues that's kind of the purview of the president. I think she's taking a very, very careful tack.
Speaking of foreign policy, at the moment, U.S. attention, particularly on security issues, is split between the Middle East, Ukraine, North Korea. There are just so many spark points around. How much attention do you really think either of the candidates, or which of the candidates, would pay more attention to the Taiwan Strait going forward?
I think with Trump, I just really don't know, because kind of my personal take is that he is even less predictable than he was 4 or 8 years ago. And I think, right now we don't know exactly what his national security and his foreign policy teams are going to look like. And so I think with Trump, it's just very hard to say. And I think with Harris, again, I think it's going to be trying to kind of stay the course, at least for the meantime. I think with the attention with kind of the hotspots that you mentioned is that the issue with China right now isn't exactly a war, such as we have seen in Ukraine and in the Middle East, right? It's a sort of an ongoing managing this relationship to avoid more catastrophes or unpredictable disasters, right? So I think at least China as an issue will always be kind of very top, near the top of anybody's list.
Right. So as Chieh-Ting says, Jaime, it's hard to look into a crystal ball and figure out what's going to happen next. But let's take a look at what's happening right now. President Biden has been using what's called PDA, or Presidential Drawdown Authority, to boost Taiwan's defenses in pretty much a direct way. On the other hand, Trump has said that Taiwan should pay for protection. Does this pretty much sum up what will happen in the future with the administrations?
I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, President Trump also had the ability to use PDA and probably still has the ability if he gets elected again. I think the important thing to look at is kind of the pattern in which both candidates maybe might approach arming Taiwan or maybe committing to Taiwan's defense. Under Trump, we saw these really big weapons deals, F-16s and tanks. They're considered more like traditional kind of weapon systems. They're very expensive, and some people have debated whether or not that's the right approach. But with Harris, or I guess with the Biden administration using PDA, these are existing stockpiles, existing weapons that are just kind of sitting there, and they're kind of, I don't want to say donated, but they're fast-tracked to countries. We've been using PDA to give a lot of weapon systems to Ukraine, and so under the Biden administration, they figured, well, Taiwan can also benefit from this, so she'll have that tool to use. But it looks like, as of right now, if she gets elected, it'll be kind of a continuation of the strategic arms sales that people have kind of characterized with Biden, which is more munitions, more asymmetric systems, smaller. Of course, these things are going to be more cheaper, so not as big as a number as Trump, but more thought into what exactly Taiwan needs to really expand the life of these systems and really have a robust defense for Taiwan.
All right, I'm going to change tack a little bit and try and peek into the minds of those who are voting. So we asked U.S. citizens living permanently here in Taiwan about what mattered to them when they cast their mail-in ballots ahead of the election. Now, this is what they said.
I think relating to Taiwan, I think some of the big issues are, like the Foreign Policy Act. I think especially between the two straits, I think most Taiwanese, that's what they're most worried about.
I think that especially like national security between in Taiwan, and also the foreign policy that the United States has with Taiwan is going to be really critical. And also I think looking at the economic aspect of US and Taiwan relations as well. What is the future of trade between the two countries going to look like? I think that's also a key issue that we will be seeing.
Liam?
So I definitely think that foreign policy is a big topic that I'm looking at very deeply with this election. I think that the United States in general has a big role to play economically in the global system, and it seems that we're pivoting towards another phase of isolationism. Americans are really concerned about what's going on at home and not really paying too much attention to what's going on outside, and I think politicians are following suit, which is kind of, I think it's a little bit regressive. So I'd like to see more open-minded foreign policy in general. I think the idea of the silicone shield is something interesting to a lot of people, and this idea of the investments and redistributing, but I'm kind of getting a little bit tired of the idea that the only reason to protect a democracy in Asia, people's ability to self-govern would just be to protect investments or technical advancement, because that advancement won't last for forever. And I would like to see a president who values Taiwan as its own full three-dimensional nation and the platform for innovation, rather than the innovations, the products of that innovation only.
Yeah, I think, Liam, you make a great point, but I think Taiwan, I think also thanks to its technology, semiconductor company has really put itself on the map, and that's something that, we've gained global recognition. So it's almost kind of like a global soft power, or this soft influence where the U.S. needs to make a decision.
So I agree with what both of them have already said, especially with the aspect of kind of only viewing Taiwan as just a country that can make a product for the rest of the world. I think that Taiwan has so much more to offer other than that.
And for the full version of that roundtable discussion, do visit our YouTube channel or the TaiwanPlus website. All right, Chieh-Ting, we heard them talk about semiconductors quite a bit, and with good reason. Can you just give us a sense of how important Taiwan's semiconductor industry is to the U.S.?
I do sympathize and relate to not looking at Taiwan just as a place that makes these things, right? As in, Taiwan has no other value other than for this, right? And I think that's that's a narrative I think people in Taiwan really don't like to see. And I think in the United States there is sort of on semiconductors, right? Like something that I kind of worry about is a sort of undertone of protectionism, right? Where people say, well, we don't want, this is too important one to be made in Taiwan in such a sort of geopolitically kind of volatile place, but also we just don't want a foreign country, right? So anybody foreign to be making these things. Right, and so I think if you look at Trump's interview with Bloomberg, right, he also referred to this, kind of when he was asked about it, right? So he said, Taiwan, they're very smart. They took all our business, they took our chips, right? Which is, not, just kind of not the whole picture at all. I think if the next president in the United States can kind of appreciate the fact that the United States is able to fuel its innovation and its AI and its technological advantage because it has a partner like Taiwan who is kind of specialized in becoming part of that whole kind of alliance and that whole kind of team of creating all of these products and creating all of these tools. I think that would obviously serve Taiwan a lot better, but I think it would also serve the United States a lot better as well.
Now, that view you mentioned on Bloomberg, Trump has also said on other mainstream media in the U.S. Take a listen to Trump's view on Taiwan and chips.
Taiwan did take all of our chip business. We used to make our own chips. Now they're made in Taiwan. 90% of the chips
Advanced
are made in
semiconductor.
Taiwan. If China takes Taiwan, they will turn the world off.
Right, as we heard there, and as you mentioned, Trump's accused Taiwan of stealing its chips industry. So is the industry likely to change, or the nature of this industry and how it works with the U.S. to change under Trump?
Again, I think with Trump, it's gotten harder to tell whether what he says today is going to be the policy for the next 4 years. So I think when he said this statement, he was definitely thinking in the more sort of protectionist kind of attitude, right? Where the United States should be doing this business. The United States should be making these chips, right? So what he didn't say was that all the design, a lot of the design, a lot of the where the chips are then eventually used, right? So that's done by a lot of U.S. companies, right? And U.S. companies are driving the demand, right, for the more advanced chips, right? And it's just that over the last many decades, the industry has evolved to a point where Taiwan is the place that is, that manufactures these things the best, right? And so I think, whether it's Harris or Trump, I think if the United States can kind of sort of appreciate that and say, okay, we're not going to think about it as more of a protectionist or even a sort of foreigner versus American issue, but more as a, these things take a lot of effort and across a lot of different places in the world, and we need to help, places in the world such as Taiwan that then helps us, the United States, grow and innovate and advance its technological industries.
Jaime, this semiconductor industry here has been referred to as the Silicon Shield, almost a guarantee of Taiwan's security. Is that still the conversation that is happening amongst the ranks of those who are making security decisions?
No, the Silicon Shield, me personally, a bit overhyped. Nothing will ever guarantee a country's security. But I think the most important thing is that, I agree with Chieh-Ting in the sense of, a lot of people in Taiwan don't like when it's like, oh, Taiwan just makes chips. That's why we should protect it. The 24 million people here that enjoy democracy is reason enough. But I think Taiwan sees an opportunity in the sense of not just opening more manufacturing centers in the United States, but it can leverage that kind of hegemony in making those chips to get what it needs, whether it be more international participation. There's this kind of phrase of chip diplomacy that Taiwan has been trying to use, closer bilateral ties with, closer bilateral unofficial ties with European countries in producing and kind of co-producing things like drones and science-driven kind of industries. So it seems like the Silicon Shield is kind of this overarching umbrella for Taiwan is so important in making 90% of those advanced chips that if it were to fall, it would just kind of really, really ruin the global supply chain. And that right there is just reason enough to make sure that nothing really happens to the island nation.
I kind of want to add to that, right? Because most people, when they think of Taiwan making more than 90% of these chips, they're thinking, well, Taiwan is the place where these things are made. And so the simple solution is, well, we can make them elsewhere, right? But I think what's even more important than the fact that they're physically made in Taiwan is that Taiwanese companies have the know-how, right? And the technological advantage and knowledge and research into how to make these things, right? So these things are not your simple products, right? They're one of the most precise and difficult things to make in the world. I think everybody's kind of thinking in terms of, okay, well, we can just relocate those factories, right? But I think even when you do that, right, you need kind of the know-how from Taiwanese firms, on Taiwanese academia, and you need the sort of the management experiences of Taiwanese firms of how to make these things. And when people talk about semiconductors, right, they have to think more than just kind of where they're physically made.
Let's take a look at Taiwan's trade relationships with the United States and China. China, including Hong Kong, in this graph is still Taiwan's biggest trading partner by a wide margin. But its share in Taiwan's exports has been falling in recent years. At the same time, exports to the United States have been steadily rising. And it's no secret that technology is the bulk of Taiwan's global exports, but it may surprise you just how reliant the country is on that sector. Between January and end of September this year, tech products made up 67% of all exports. Of those, 50% were chips, and an additional 27% were AI-related products. So, Chieh-Ting, we talk about these AI-related products. Almost 2/3, in fact, goes to the United States, which is quite a huge chunk on both sides of the equation. Do you think the next administration in the U.S., be it Harris or Trump, will make more of a push to try and diversify where they're importing it from to lessen reliance on Taiwan?
I think there will definitely be people on both sides that will say those kind of things. And I think the reality is that it's not that easy, right, to sort of overnight or a very short period of time find another market that has the same amount of know-how, that's the same amount of capacity, same amount of experience that can replace Taiwan. So I think even if the incoming administration wants to, it won't be that easy to find a replacement in the short term.
And Jaime, we talk about Taiwan's know-how, particularly in manufacturing technology, but still relies on the U.S. for defensive hardware. Now, is that likely to change under the new administration? And is Taiwan likely to lean in more into domestic weapons production? So if that happens, is there going to be a change in relationship, particularly depending on which candidate comes into power?
No, I think both sides. This is a pretty bipartisan issue in the sense of there's an agreement in Washington that Taiwan's defense is in its own hands, ultimately, and the ideal situation would be to make Taiwan as prickly as possible, this asymmetric strategy, so that China never even thinks about conducting that operation. I think when it comes to domestic weapons production, especially in Taiwan, we look at missiles and drones. Those two industries are very, very robust, very advanced for Taiwan, and I think especially just being in Washington about 2 weeks ago, there is a pretty big push for co-producing weapons. It's not official yet which specific system, but just the kind of first initial steps to inject investment and maybe U.S. plans in Taiwan to kind of pump out these munitions. It seems like drones are going to be the first step because, Taiwan has made an announcement last year of making this drone fleet, which is basically this idea that you flood the Taiwan Strait with tens of thousands of drones. And because Taiwan already has a really good commercial drone industry, the goal is basically upgrading all of those commercial drones to a military standard, and they're looking to the U.S. for helps in those plans. So regardless if it's Trump or Harris, I do think that there's still going to be that plan to push for kind of this domestic Taiwan-only kind of push to produce these munitions.
Right. And Chieh-Ting, another point raised in that roundtable is valuing or defending Taiwan because it's a democracy pressurized by an authoritarian neighbor, rather than just because it's a manufacturing hub supplying a lot of the world's semiconductors. How does that resonate with each of the candidates, would you say?
I think, for Trump, again, I think, he definitely operates much more on practical interests, right? Whether you can give me something in return for, me giving you something else. And so I think the sort of ideals of democracy, human rights, rule of law, kind of protecting that against a aggressive authoritarian sort of expansionist power. I don't know how much of that holds water in his head, although if you kind of look at the Republican Party as at least the kind of established sort of democratic and foreign policy circles, these kind of arguments or these kind of lines of thought are sort of talked about, right? I think on the Harris side, of course, she kind of just generally continues President Biden's strategies and kind of overall direction, right? I think these values are still going to be talked about. I think the reason why China is always going to be a near top priority issue and why Taiwan is going to be sort of continue to be a top priority issue in the foreseeable future is I think people do care about the values of protecting a democracy against unwanted expansion, right? Because I think people sort of saw that in Ukraine and how, unfortunately, how that became a reality in that part of the world, right? And so I think that really crystallized and that really kind of helped people visualize kind of what the worst case scenarios may be. And so I think that's something I still think has some salience in Washington, D.C.
Right. We're just about running out of time here. But before we go, Jaime, I want to check in with you. As a U.S. voter living in Taiwan, what kind of conversations would you like to see during these elections about cross-strait tensions?
Well, I think, being in the media and as a U.S. voter, I'd like to hear maybe more conversation about Taiwan, but less in the shadow of China. I think too many times we hear Taiwan, in the headlines because China's conducting sort of drill or, China said something. And I would like to see more action, actually, less conversation in the sense of more U.S. delegations coming here, more exchanges, not just from a government level, but also from maybe, universities coming, more students coming, more recognition. I remember going back home home last year and seeing more Taiwanese products in Costco, more things like that to really get Taiwan on the map, because it's, again, not just about chips. And of course, it's always going to be about democracy, but more of that soft power leading in, because living here in Taiwan for so many years, it is, it really does have a unique kind of impression to make. And being one of the freest places in Asia, I think it's that kind of conversation that people need to have, and less in that shadow of China.
And before we go, same question to you, Chieh-Ting.
Yeah, so I think I've been working in the United States on U.S.-Taiwan relations, U.S.-Taiwan politics for many years, and it's always been talked about as an issue, as a problem. So I really would like to see that narrative kind of flipped around, and people asking, okay, how do we really take advantage of Taiwan as an asset for the U.S., right? How can Taiwan really help the U.S.? How can the U.S. help Taiwan? And how can the two countries together kind of achieve some common goals, right? Of course, away, as Jaime said, away from Taiwan being an issue within U.S.-China relations, right? But U.S.-Taiwan relations actually having its own sort of positive and proactive meaning in and of itself.
And with that, we'll leave it there. It's been great to have you on the program. Chieh-Ting, the director of the think tank U.S. Taiwan Watch and the co-founder of Katagalan Media, speaking to us from California, and Jaime Ocon, TaiwanPlus's very own defense correspondent here in Taipei. And for our viewers everywhere, it has been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.